I tell you what, Arlene, you put the biggest smile on my face. Arlene, she came up to me last week, bless her heart. She came up to me and she gave me the biggest hug and a kiss on my cheek. She goes, I heard you for the first time last week. Isn't it amazing what an earpiece can do? Isn't that awesome? I'm telling you what, we need to get one for about 10 more people, and we're going to work on that here in the next... No, we are seriously. I know that's a need, and we're going to try to address that soon. And what a blessing. I've never looked over and seen her smile and sing so much. It's amazing. Isn't that awesome? I love it. She puts a smile on my face every week seeing her. And I'm glad to be able to see that happen. Well, if you would take your Bibles and turn to Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. We're going to talk about dealing with unfairnesses of life. Dealing with the unfairnesses of life. Have you ever thought to yourself, life really is unfair? How many have ever had that thought? Raise your hand. And some of you are not telling the truth. You ever thoughts like, and I've heard these are things I've heard in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Man, so-and-so just went on their 4th vacation. How does that work? You ever thought that? Oh, come on, let's be honest. So-and-so just keeps losing weight, and I just keep gaining weight. That was in the last week. So-and-so seems to get everything they want whenever they want. That's not fair. So-and-so just got another new car. They just got a new one last year. These are things I've heard in the last couple weeks around here. So-and-so just got new furniture. I'd love to have the old stuff they got rid of. So-and-so got the promotion at work that I deserved. I worked hard for it. So-and-so just seems to have it all together, and life just doesn't seem fair. You ever had those thoughts? I know I have. And when these various aspects of our life seem to be unfair, we have a choice to make, and there's several ways we can respond to it. Number one, we can get upset and angry, and sometimes we see that. Someone works really hard at work, and they really vying for that promotion, and it doesn't happen, and all of a sudden they're just angry, and everybody knows they're upset, and hey, what's wrong? Nothing. Sure sign that something's really eating at them when they say nothing. Because life is seemingly unfair. We can pout, moan and groan. We can get jealous or even bitter. Or we can accept our circumstances as being from God. Did you know that we serve a sovereign God? Do you know that we serve a God who can do whatever He wants because He's God? I mean, He can make it rain. He can make the sun to appear. He can make the snow to come down. He can make it all go away. He's God. He can do whatever He wants. And He doesn't have to make any excuses for it. He's sovereign. And there are a lot of things in life that we have absolutely no control over, but there is one thing that we absolutely must control, and that's our response to the things that God allows in our life. We have the ability to control how we respond to those things that we think are seemingly unfair. I want you to consider, first of all, Joseph's circumstances. And we're going to take just a moment and read from Genesis chapter 37, verses 3 and following. It says, Now Israel, verse 3, loved Joseph more than his other sons, because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age. And he made a robe of many colors for him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. Then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. And he said to them, Listen to this dream I had. I don't know about you, but at this point, I don't know that I would have went on with the dream. It says, listen to this dream. There we were, binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly my sheaf stood up, and your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. Are you really going to reign over us? His brothers asked him. Are you really going to rule us? So they hated him even more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream and told to his brothers, Look, he said, I had another dream. At this time the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bound down to me. He told his father and his brothers, but his father rebuked him. What kind of dream is it that you have had? He said, are your mother and brothers and I going to bow down to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the matter in mind. And his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. I mean, when you look at this situation, he was the youngest. I mean, he was the baby of the family, so to speak, and I just have a little philosophy about the baby. I always say I'm the baby of the family. My parents saved the best for last. Just kidding. But as the youngest of the family, there's always this perception that the youngest gets everything they want. Is that sometimes true? I mean, they're the ones that they come along, they get everything that the older brothers and sisters wanted, and he's the prize child, so to speak, from their brother's perspective. So he's the young guy. Secondly, he's a dreamer. I don't know that I would have shared these dreams. I mean, here it is. I mean, he's telling his brother that these sheaves are here, and my sheaf stands up, and your sheaves bow down to me. And as if that wasn't enough, I have another dream. Really? And the sun, the moon, the stars, and they're all bowing down to him. And his brothers, are you saying that we're actually going to bow down to you? And if that weren't enough, his brothers began to hate him. 3 times it says in the passage, they hated him, and they hated him all the more. I mean, what was it that Joseph really did to deserve the hatred that his brothers gave him? I mean, here he is just being a son, the last-born son. He's the, so to speak, the special son. But his circumstances here, he's the youngest, he's the dreamer, he's hated. But look at his character. We see something about his character here in verse 13. Israel said to Joseph, your brothers, are pasturing the flocks at Shechem. Get ready, I'm sending you to them. I'm ready, Joseph replied. Then Israel said to him, go and see how your brothers and the flocks are doing, and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. I mean, here it is, his brothers hate him. How many of us would really want to do something that would benefit our brothers, knowing that they hated us? But his character was this. He was obedient to what his father asked him to do. In all the circumstances of life, we must remain obedient, regardless of whether or not we believe circumstances are really unfair or not. Every one of us are going to face those circumstances in life. Why did he get this? Why did she get that? Why did God allow this to happen in my life? Regardless of whatever happens, knowing that God is sovereign, we must remain obedient. That's what God has called us to. We don't have to agree with what God did as being right or wrong. It's irrelevant to the fact that God has called us to obedience. We don't have to accept it as right or best. God has already knows that he's perfect. God doesn't make mistakes. But Joseph in his character remained obedient. And look what begins to happen. Look it down to verse 15. A man found him there wandering in the field and asked him, what are you looking for? I'm looking for my brothers, Joseph said. Can you tell me where they are pasturing their flocks? They moved on from here, and the man said, I heard him say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph set out after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And they saw him in the distance, and before he had reached them, they plotted to kill him. I mean, here he is. He's not even there yet. He's trying to be obedient to what his father has asked him. And from the distance, they see him, and already their anger and their jealousy and their bitterness is working up so much within them that they plot against him to kill him. Verse 19, they said to one another, here comes that dreamer. Wow. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. And we can say that a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. So his brothers are plotting to kill him. I would dare say that Joseph is not really about to have a good day. It's just not going to be one of those times in his life that you say, Lord, thank you for this beautiful day. His brothers are hating him and plotting against him to kill him. But it doesn't stop there. Look on further here. Verse 21, when Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from them. And he said, let's not take his life. Reuben also said to them, don't shed blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him, intending to rescue him from their hands and return him to his father. So one man out of all the brothers says, hey, we can't kill him. He has an idea that maybe I'll come back later and rescue him. Verse 23, when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the robe of many colors that he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty and there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat a meal. And they looked up and there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. And their camels were carrying aromatic gum, balsam, and resin and going down to Egypt. Then Judah said to the brothers, what do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. His brothers agreed. I mean, after all, they're all trying to kill him. They all want to shed his blood. They want to send his coat back to his father and say, well, hey, a vicious animal ate him. Oh, but wait a minute. We have nothing to gain from that. I dare say we should probably sell him into slavery. Let's sell him to the band of Ishmaelites. At least there we get something out of it. I mean, these brothers were vicious. They hated him. They were jealous of him. They were jealous of the fact that seemingly the father loved him more than them. And they're upset with him and they're bitter. Can we learn a simple lesson, too, as we're looking at this story? That when things happen in our life that we don't think are unfair, when things happen that we don't think are right and just, when we respond wrong to them, bitterness and jealousy will set in. We have to guard ourselves against that because it happens every day in life. How many of us look around and we see things, well, that's not fair. That's not fair. This ain't right. How did that happen? And when we begin to respond in a wrong fashion, bitterness and jealousy will creep in and it will destroy you. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15 says, lest any root of bitterness creep in, and that root does what roots do. It begins to take root, and it grows deeper and stronger, and it gets more vicious, and it will destroy us from the inside out. All the more reason as believers to trust God that He does not make any mistakes. He's perfect. So they're beginning to respond very wrong to the circumstances. So his brothers sell him into slavery. And then as we go on a little bit further, not only did he get sold into slavery, but then he gets sold again, a second time. I would dare say that for Joseph, life really is not fair. All of a sudden, as we compare our lives to his, our life looks pretty good. Anybody ever been sold into a slave? None of us. Man, life is not looking good for Joseph at this point. Just when you think things can't get worse. Look at Genesis chapter 39. I want you to consider Joseph's conduct. His circumstances, he was the youngest, he was a dreamer, he was hated. His character, he was obedient despite the circumstances. But his conduct, look at this. Verse 2 and following. Actually, verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. And the Lord was with Joseph. And he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him and the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor in his master's sight and became his personal attendant. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under his authority. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was on all that he owned in his house and in his fields. He left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. After some time, his master's wife looked longingly at Joseph and said, "Sleep with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not concern himself with anything in this house, and he has put all that he owns under my authority. No one in his house is greater than I am. He has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. So how could I do such a great evil and sin against God?" What was his conduct? You can see, first of all, he remained obedient. Because of everything that he was, because of the character that he had within him, his conduct was right before God. Can you imagine? Who would have known? I mean, Joseph had authority in his house. Who would have known if he would have done anything with Potiphar? Who would have known? God would have known. And his mindset was, how can I do this great sin and sin against my God? Regardless of the circumstances, how often in life when we look at circumstances as being unfair and unjust and just not plain right, do we say, well, I have the right to get even. If anybody had a right to get even, it was probably Joseph. When you look at the fleshly circumstances, anyone who would fault the guy if after he got to this place of authority, if he went back and took care of his brothers? Who would have ever faulted him for that? But he didn't, because he had character. And he looked at every circumstances, and you're going to find as we look forward in the days ahead, God was preparing Joseph for a much greater scheme in life, a grander landscape. And Joseph was going to lead the way for God's marvelous hand to be at work. And Joseph, all he did, when you look at the big picture, he was faithful. He was obedient. He stood for the things that he knew God would want him to stand for. He didn't get even. He didn't try to get ahead. He remained faithful to his responsibilities despite the unfairnesses that were in his life. I mean, who would have known? God would have known. And he could not do the great wickedness and sin against God. And you can see as we go forward, things took it to an even a worse turn. Because Potiphar's wife didn't get what she wanted, she cried wolf. We're not going to get into that whole aspect this morning. But think about it. How would you respond in his shoes? How would you handle it? I know my flesh. I know me. Man, I don't want to get even. Who could blame you, right? But see, it comes back down to that topic we talked about a couple weeks ago, surrender. Surrender requires, what's the word? Trust. Do I trust God? That God makes no mistakes, right? Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose. Verse 29 goes on to say that we might be conformed to the image of his Son. God has allowed this circumstance in my life to make me more like him, right? So do I trust him enough? Do I love God enough to say, God, I trust you with whatever circumstance you allow into my life? I may not like it. I may not have chosen it. I may not have wanted it for my life, for my family. But God, you have allowed it for a reason. And I love you enough, I trust you enough to know that you're not going to make any mistakes through this. That was Joseph. His brothers hated him. They didn't like the fact that obviously God's hand was on him. The Pharaoh saw it. Potiphar saw that God's hand was on him. Everything he touched was successful. Was that coincidence? Was it that he was just so good at whatever he touched, that he had so many skills, so many abilities? Boy, he was just gifted in so many things that everything he looked just prospered? No. That was God's hand of blessing on his life for being obedient and faithful to the responsibilities that God put in his life. How many of us, if we were to be sold into slavery, would want to work our hardest and do the best that we could for the guy who bought me? We'd be trying to figure out how we're going to escape. We'd be busy trying to figure out how we're going to get out of there. We're going to be looking at all the nooks and the crannies and seeing how fast can I make my plan come together and get out of here. Joseph didn't do that. He worked hard and remained faithful to his responsibilities. I want to make 3 observations from this story here. There's so much more to it, and we're going to look at it further next week. But the first observation is this. We find it in chapter 39, verse 1 and 2. Now Joseph had been taken to Egypt. An Egyptian named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. And the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. You say, well, that's a really simple phrase. Yes, it is. And it's still a simple phrase that is true to us today as believers. You know that God's word says that I will never leave you nor forsake you. We have the same promise that that Joseph had. God was with him, and we have to know that no matter what we do, God is with us. That ought to assure us. That ought to comfort us, encourage us. That in all the circumstances of life that could happen to us, God is with us. We're not alone. So often we feel like Elijah. I am alone here on this mountain with all these prophets of Baal. No, you're not. You might think you're alone, but you're really not. God is with us. We take that for granted sometimes. We overlook that simple fact that God is with us. No matter where we go. Look, I was reading this yesterday in Hebrews. It says, all things are naked and open before God with whom we have to do. There is nothing you can do to escape the eye of God. Psalm 139, no matter where you go in this universe, wherever you go on this planet, it says God is there. Go into the heavens, go into the oceans, God's presence is there. That is awesome. You cannot escape the presence of God. He's with us, just like he was with Joseph. Number 2, others saw that the Lord was with Joseph. We see that from verse 3. It says, when his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor in his master's sight. Number 2, others saw that the Lord was with Joseph. Can I just say this? People are watching you. People are watching you. That's convicting to me. I wish I could say all the time that I never get angry, I never get upset, I never do this wrong, never do that wrong. And it seems in the moment of my impatience, somebody's right there saying, wow, good job. And I want you to know my wife is always right there saying, good job, Kenny. Oh, that irritates me. People are always watching. What do they see? Joseph so responded in obedience and faithfulness to his responsibilities. And he so put his heart into it that his master saw that God was with him. All the life circumstances. What happens when we go to work? What happens when we talk to our neighbor and we gripe and complain and murmur and we say this isn't fair and that ain't fair and why did my boss do this and why did the company do this and la la la, and we go on and on and on. Will they see that God is with us? Or will we destroy our testimony for Christ in the workplace, with the neighbor across the fence, with the guy at the gas station? Will they see that God is with us? We've said it before, you might be the only picture of Jesus Christ they see, because there are a lot of people who may not come through the doors of this church. What will they see in us? Will they see a difference? Will they see that God is with us? That's huge. It matters how we respond to things. I cannot control. I didn't wake up in the morning and say, woohoo! I think it's a great day to get a flat tire. Yes, I hope it blows out down the highway. Woo! We were driving down the road the other day going towards 390 South. And a guy in a truck was coming 390 North, and we heard this tire blow out. Tire rubbers flying everywhere. Cars were trying to avoid the chips of rubber. And who wakes up in the morning and says, it's a great day for this to happen? I can't control the circumstances of life, but I must control how I respond to them, because it'll be a picture of Christ with me. I think there's a third observation here. Because Joseph was obedient, because he remained faithful to his responsibilities, because God was with him. Number 3, Joseph earned his master's trust. How do I know that? Look at verse 4. Joseph found favor in his master's sight and became his personal attendant. Everything that he had was in his care. I mean, the only thing he did not have access to was his wife. As the only thing was hands off. Everything else he had complete authority over. He earned his master's trust. What a blessing to be able to say, I was sold as a slave to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites sold me as a slave to Potiphar, who was an assistant for the Pharaoh. And I was so obedient, so faithful to my responsibilities, that God allowed me to rise and find favor in my master's sight. You know what that tells me? That obedience and faithfulness will bring reward. Sometimes we want our reward when we want it. And we work hard, we do what we're supposed to do, and now I want the return right now, right here. I want a bigger raise, I want a better position, I want a nicer car. I mean, after all, I deserve this. I want it now. I dare say, and I'm just thinking out loud here, that Joseph, as he was sold into the Ishmael, as a slave to the Ishmaelites, probably never had in his mind, okay, year 1, I'm just going to be a faithful slave. Woo. Year 2, I'm going to make it up to, Potiphar's house. Year 3, I'm just going to take over everything. I'm going to rise up in this position. He could not have planned that. There was no 3, 5, 7-year goals. He was just faithful and obedient. And God says, we will reap if we faint not. In due season. Not in our season, but in God's timing. The benefits and the blessings of our faithfulness and obedience will be rewarded. And if we have to wait till the life to come to get that, it's okay. It really is. Because we're not living for the things of this earth, right? Right? We're pilgrims, sojourners, aliens. Really, our home is in heaven. And so if we have to wait to get there, to get our reward, that's okay. Because the best this life has to offer can't compare to the least of heaven. But Joseph was obedient and faithful, and God rewarded him for it. So how do we handle the unfairnesses of life? How do we deal with those things that we would not pick, that we would not choose, that we don't even like? How do we deal with that? I think there's several things that we can learn from Joseph's life. Number 1, you just stay faithful and obedient. Just stay faithful. Just be obedient. Just trust God enough to know that He's not making any mistakes. He knows exactly what He's doing. He's a sovereign God. If He didn't want the negative things in our life, He could have just wiped those out of our life, but He doesn't. Sometimes He allows us because He's forming us and making us and molding us. As it says in verse 29 of Romans 8, to the image of His Son. So you stay faithful and obedient. Number 2, I think Paul puts it this way. He said, I learned that whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. Oh, but God, I don't like this circumstance. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. Are you willing to trust me and be content? Paul goes on to say in 1 Thessalonians, in everything give thanks. I have to be thankful for these, but God, this isn't fair. It doesn't matter if it's fair. Am I thankful? I can remember growing up, and I'll just give you a little story of something being unfair. My brother was always better at everything than me. Everything. I hated it. I'd be sitting there playing a video game for hours when I was like in 7th grade. We had this Atari 800 XL. Remember the old Ataris? Playing an Atari. And I got really good at Frogger. I had played it for like 3 hours. We just got it that night, and I was just mastering it. Doing, 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 doing. My brother walks in, what are you doing? Playing Frogger. I bet I can beat you. No, you can't. I've been playing for 3 hours. You've never played this game before. I don't care, I can beat you. He destroyed me. The first time he ever touched it. This is a pattern for my brother. He beat me in everything in life except for 2 things, getting married and having kids. I beat him in those 2 things. My brother would look at me and say, give me $1. I ain't giving you $1. Because I was the one that worked on our farm. My brother's 4 years older, but I did all the yard work. I did all the lawn mowing jobs as he sat in the air condition. But my brother would come to me and say, give me $1. I want to buy a pack of baseball cards. No. We go into the little convenience store. I buy 10 packs of cards. Not one good player in them. Not one. He finally talked me into giving him $1, and in 1 pack he'd get 4 of the best players you could possibly get. To this day, I'm trying to get him to buy a lottery ticket. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Everything with my brother was like that. And it really bothered me. It really started eating at me. Because it was just unfair. It's just totally not fair. Remember going into college, I was not, after going through high school following my brother, I was not going to follow him in college. That wasn't going to happen. Because everything was always compared to Craig. And all of a sudden, a week before college started, I changed my mind and ended up going to the same college. And thankfully, there was enough students that Craig was his own person. I really had to deal with it. It wasn't fair. And then you come to a conclusion that, no, it's not fair. And it's okay. Today we look back and laugh. And really, when we start being faithful and obedient and thankful and content with what God's doing in our life, whether it's fair or not really doesn't matter anymore. Because God is perfect. And God is holy. He's right. And He's just. Learn from Joseph. So many things in his life was unfair. I mean, think about it. The relationship with his father. And having his coat of many colors filled with blood and sent back. And man, how, read the story. I just kind of took some key spots there. But read the story. It broke his father's heart. That's not fair. What did he do to deserve that? See, things in life are not always based on whether or not we deserve it or not. A lot of things in life, whether they're fair or not, isn't based on whether or not we would choose it. It's all based on God's sovereign will for our lives. And He can do whatever He wants. He's God. So let's learn from it. Be faithful. Be obedient. God will reward in due time. Be content. And be thankful for whatever He chooses to allow in our life. Because we have the ability to choose how we're going to respond. Let's respond in a biblical manner and bring glory to Him. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank You so much for just the